Hello, everyone. My name is Matthew, and I'm a software developer with about 30 years of experience. I have literally done nothing else since I was an adult, except for 3 years I did spend in a college like environment. To be specific, it was a seminary, but the coursework there was very high end, very difficult. The academic standards were pretty high. So things like Latin, philosophy, English composition, um, music. It was kind of a liberal arts kind of a thing as far as what I took away for non seminary purposes. From a secular point of view, I still put that on my resume because I spent 3.5 months there. Excuse me, 3.5 years there, and just sticking with something that long. And this was not like a easy college environment. There was no TV, no internet. You have to get up at certain time every day. There were certain prayers that were said in common. A lot of discipline. It was almost like being in the military as far as discipline. So yeah, I'm going to keep that on my resume. So that was from 2000 to 2003. I was at that seminary. But aside from that, I have done nothing else with my adult life than software development. Even before I got my first professional job, I was doing lots of software development in my spare time. It was something I always knew I wanted to do since I was about 7 years old. So I'm kind of one of those born developers, one of those, you know, I don't want to say prodigy, but I always knew what I wanted to do. Uh, I mean, not everyone gets that. Not everyone has that situation where you just know what you want to do from the time you're a kid. But that was me. I loved the concept of writing software. I just always loved it. So, in fact, one time when I was 7, I was so desperate, I wrote a basic program on a piece of paper, even though I couldn't type it into a computer. None of my family, no one had one. I had no access to a computer. There wasn't one at the library. There was no way for me to get to a computer. There were no Raspberry Pis for $35. There were no garage sale computers for 10 or 20 or $100. None of that was an option. Now, maybe that was a good thing. Maybe that's why I became so into software development, because I built up that desire for it. Who knows? But the point is, if anyone's a software developer, I am. Okay, that's kind of the point I'm making. I loved it, and furthermore, I trained on it. I mean, I trained in that career. From the time I got my hands on a computer at age 15, I wrote a lot of quick basic programs. We're talking games, utilities, you know, applications, like a word processor, things like that. And as soon as I could, I got something better. In this case, Pascal, QP 1.0, Quick Pascal. And I wrote tons of text mode games in Quick Pascal. Then I wrote some graphical games. I wrote a couple of Legend of Zelda ripoffs and things like that. And it was fun. I loved it. But again, I always knew I wanted to program. And right now, for the first time ever, I am being forced to question what I should be doing for a living. I'm forced to question, am I a real software developer? Can I do this professionally? Is this something I can legit expect to get paid to do? I mean, I would never have guessed that this day would ever come, even 20 years ago. I divide my career into about 3 sections, 3 main phases. The first phase was from my first job, professional job as a software developer, which was about 1998. And I had that job for about a year. And then I got another job pretty soon after that. And then that job lasted for, I think a year and a half. But I actually quit that job because I wanted to go to the seminary, because I wanted to try out a vocation to the priesthood. So I did take 3.5 years off. So I admit there was 3.5 years I was not pursuing software development, but all the other time I did. And I would almost say that even that foray into the seminary actually help me today as a software engineer. And you know how? AI. AI, what is it? What can it do? What will it be able to do? What are its potentials? At the seminary, I learned about, philosophy, for example, and what is it that makes humans able to reason? What is reason? It's the ability to abstract. I look at different chairs and I abstract the notion of chairness. Chairness is a immaterial thing. It's something that is not visible. A dog cannot understand what chairness. A dog might understand this chair or that chair, or jump on this chair because I put a treat there, or I'm tapping my hand on the chair and saying, "Here, boy." But the dog does not understand abstract concepts like time, past, present, future. All those things are unique to humans. And I could tell you why. I could go into that, but I don't really want to get off track. So even the years I spent at the seminary have helped me to understand the place of AI and how it's fundamentally limited, and how we are going to run into a limitation because it cannot actually think. I knew that it couldn't think when it first came out, when everyone was blown away by it. And once the bubble bursts, or it's bursting, and later on it will be obvious that it has burst, through all those phases of the whole process, of the whole hype cycle of AI, I'm sitting here saying, I knew it. It's a fact. Something that is 100% physical cannot step outside the physical and comprehend things outside of its level of life, outside of its level of existence, out of its plane of existence. The example I use is, imagine playing video games on your computer screen or on your TV screen. How many hours would you have to spend before one of those characters comes out of the screen and joins you in the real world and shakes your hand or gives you a kiss or whatever? How many hours? 1,000? A million? A billion? A Google? How many hours? The answer is, well, never. In infinity. It would never happen. Those creatures, those sprites that exist in the world of that video game, exist only as algorithms and sprites and memory addresses and blobs of memory. That's all those things are. They can't comprehend of the reality that you and I participate in every day. There's no bridging those two. There's no way to bridge that, okay? Likewise, a computer program, software, a linear algebra, statistics, large language model will never be able to understand anything. Will never be able to reason or understand. It can do some pretty good parlor tricks and act like it's understanding, just like a parrot could act like it's talking. There's different animals that can kind of mimic human speech, or act like it's doing something like a human. Monkeys often, they can pretend they're drinking a cup of coffee and all this kind of stuff, but they're not real humans. They're only aping, and as in the case of monkey, that's where we used to get the word aping something. It's where you're pretending, where you're putting on the aspects of something else, but it's not really proper to you. You're not really doing it. So AI is an important topic, and actually that's part of this video. Is AI to blame? And I think there is part of it because of the aforementioned AI hype cycle. AI is in a hype cycle right now. Every company there is, from the especially large to corporation size, not so much small businesses. They're not really getting into AI, I don't think. But the larger ones, if they can bolt on, duct tape on some kind of AI doohickey to their existing website or software, and then brag about it in their next big event, on their website or at their board meeting. They all want to be able to talk about what they're doing in AI, because AI is all that matters. AI is the big hot thing. It's the buzzword. It's what everyone's talking about. And I think some companies overestimated what AI would be able to do and where AI was going. Because, see, remember, when ChatGPT hit the market, it blew everyone away. We didn't know what they were building until it just came out. So all of a sudden, boom, you got this powerful large language model that seems to be able to talk to you. And we assumed that, wow, if this is what we have in 2023, imagine what we're going to have in 2030. AGI is just around the corner. That is to say, artificial general intelligence. That's the AI that we all see in the movies, Data on Star Trek, all the different AIs, good and bad, that we've seen in various sci-fi movies, the Terminator, stuff like that. Those characters are basically, for all intents and purposes, human. They can act and learn and reason and think and even have emotions like a human. I mean, emotions are almost like I almost think it's interesting that some sci-fi movies act as if emotion is going to be the hard thing to attain for a robot or an android or an AI. Being able to reason and understand things perfectly, oh, that's the Data can do that, of course. That's nothing. That's within our reach. But to be able to feel anger and sadness and all that, oh, that takes a lot more doing. That's a huge leap up. I don't think so. I think the much bigger leap is being able to reason, and we're nowhere near it yet. We're still nowhere near it. So, but the fact is, a lot of companies are jumping on the AI bandwagon. Some of them preemptively or prematurely laid off a lot of their workers. And it's true that a lot of kind of mindless jobs existed out there. There's a lot of jobs that AI can replace right now. Building a basic spreadsheet, writing a basic function in some programming language, low end, let's say code monkeys or computer programmers. Let's not say software development, because that's a whole different thing than writing code. If all you can do is write simple, basic functions of 20, 25 lines or less, ChatGPT can already do that. I'm sorry, but that ship has already sailed. That does not require reasoning. What the AI can't do is understand an entire code base, the context of where this function fits in the larger code base, why we chose this or that library, why we chose this or that framework or this or that pattern, and what this code is doing in the big picture. That is what the AI always loses track of. The AI is good at generating boilerplate or simple functions and getting you started, helping with maybe pouring through a large text file full of error messages and pointing out what might be the problem. It's good at those things. It's a good tool. But we've had lots of tools created over the past 50 years. And we never said, oh, wrap it up, guys. We had a good run. Software development's over. We've never said that before, and it's never been true until now, and it still isn't true. Because all we have is incremental development. Sometimes you have big bursts of progress, which we've had many times in the past. We had compilers. We had the move from hand coding websites to things like frameworks, like React and Angular and Vue. We had things like Node.js come out. So now we have JavaScript on the back end. There's been some developments, sometimes major ones, but they don't destroy the whole existing software development ecosystem. They might require us to evolve another step or retool a little bit, but that's it. There's still software developers. And I've lived through a lot of that in my 30 years in the industry. And I guess 98 to 2006, and I guess it's 28 years in the industry with a few years off. But again, I have not worked for any other industry. I have not been in any other careers other than software developer. When I first graduated from high school, I was working as a typesetter at a book publisher. And I actually had some issues with discipline. I was not the disciplined man that I am today. And I actually got fired. I wouldn't even say laid off. I got fired. Pretty much it was like the last day before I graduated high school. I was so looking forward to working full-time at this company. And I was so looking forward to playing around and being on the Macintoshes they just got in. Because we had these They were typesetting systems. They were not computers. They were not Mac or PC or anything or Linux or anything. They were typesetting machines. And we went from that to Macintosh based hardware. And so the day the Macintoshes came in, I remember unpacking them, and I remember they told me to vacuum the floor. And I remember doing a very half-hearted job on that vacuuming. Again, I was 18 and a half years old. I mean, come on. So I was very excited about, nerding out on these Macintoshes. The one I was going to be on, I think, had a DOS card in it. So it would run DOS/Windows as well as Mac OS or whatever it was called at the time. Um, and I never really got to play on it much because I got fired. But after that, there was a small stint as I worked at an appliance, kind of a department store with a TV department, a furniture department, a computer department. I was the door greeter for that company for a while. And then I quickly got a job at Computer City, not to be confused with Circuit City, but it was a competitor at the time. In my city, there was Best Buy, Circuit City, and Computer City. Computer City, if you don't know of it, it's it's from Tandy Corporation. It's the same corporation that had Radio Shack. And it was a computer store. All they sold was computers and software and peripherals and printers and all that kind of stuff. And I was a salesman there. And when I was there is when I got into hardware. I learned how to build a computer. And then I did that for a little bit. I did work for a while as kind of a PC tech. And I built several of my own computers, did as much of computer stuff as I could, which interestingly, I want to point out that's not a different career. We're talking a very side related thing. To this day, I understand computers. I understand everything that goes on in a computer at the lowest level, even things that took place before the late 1990s. I went back and learned. Like I learned about the first hard drives. I learned about how video cards work at a bit level, like at the lowest level. And all the other parts of a computer. I wanted to understand a computer completely. I dabbled in assembly language. So I know how a compiler is doing its thing. I know how it's generating this assembly code and what's actually happening at the low level. In fact, in Pascal, you were able to do some assembly stuff and you were able to write to memory locations because we're talking, this is DOS. You could do whatever you wanted in memory. You could do whatever, you could misbehave if you wanted. Remember the age when you had TSRs? That stands for terminate and stay resident. A program would usually, it was a .com file. This was a different kind of .com back in the DOS days. You had like command.com. Well, you often had these .com files. You run it and it would just load something into memory and it would stay resident. So now when you do something on the keyboard, something runs because there's something sitting there in memory because the program terminated, but now it's resident in memory. DOS was not a multitasking operating system. So, those were the good old days. A little bit of nostalgia there. So again, even the years I spent before my first job in 1998, I was neck deep in computers. That's all I wanted to do. That's all I cared about. It's all I studied. I spent so much time. I spent time networking, learning about networks. At Computer City, they had a correspondence course in networking from 3Com. You might be familiar with the large networking company 3Com. I think they're big in consumer level and maybe some small business level networking equipment. And again, this was the late 90s. And they had a correspondence course. They had a booklet. You learned all about networking, different topologies, Ethernet, token ring, all the different layers of networking, the ODI layer, all that stuff. And each time you got to the end of a chapter, you had to make a phone call and give your answers over the touch tone phone. Because this was when the internet was pretty young. So you had to do this over the phone. And I took this test, all the tests. I did the whole book and I saved up all my points. And at the end, I got like a spring jacket, kind of a light jacket. Again, I'm originally from Northern Illinois, and then I moved to Texas in 2004. That's where I still live. So I'll talk more about that later. But in my hometown, we had the 4 seasons. We had spring and fall. We often needed a jacket. I got this jacket with all my points from 3Com. I still have that jacket to this day. It has one little tear on one of the sleeves, but that jacket is like 30 years old. So I'm keeping it now out of stubbornness, just as a souvenir. I mean, just as a memento now at this point. But anyhow, there are so many things that I learned to make myself the best developer. And so on my own, once I was kind of adult age, about 18, I started studying C and C++. I did actually take one college course, which turned out to be a joke because they mostly taught C. It was supposed to be an object-oriented programming using C++, but all they really did was C. But I got an A in the course. There wasn't really much more at my local community college, so I didn't really do much else. So I stuck with self-learning. I was self-taught. I'm mostly a self-taught developer, with a few exceptions, which I'm going to discuss. So my first software engineering job, which was kind of a trial by fire, kind of a throw me into the deep end. I had one boss, and I had a boss and a supervisor, kind of like a lead developer. They both were ex-military. They were both ex-Marines. And so they pretty much hazed me. They treated me like the new guy. Every time I messed up, I had to bring them donuts, and I felt like I was going to get fired. And they gave me the business and scolded me about this and that. It was a hard learning experience, but I learned a lot. The manager of the engineering part of this firm kind of took me under his wing a bit and taught me some things. And one of the things he did, he had me get self-help books like Think and Grow Rich, How to Make Friends and Influence People, 7 Habits of Successful People. I mean, there was like probably a dozen books like that. He had me buy them. Again, this was before PDFs, before ebooks, before the internet almost. So I went to Barnes and Noble and I bought all these books that he recommended, and I read them cover to cover. But he also had me get some books on software development. There was one that was a hardcover book on software engineering. I read it cover to cover. So while I can say I'm self-taught, I also kind of filled in a lot of the holes with a lot of rounding out, I would put my education up against any college students. Okay. I'm just saying. I'm just saying. There was also a book on software testing. I don't know if my boss was thinking I'd have to get demoted to be a software tester or what he was thinking, but he had me get a book on software testing, and I read that book cover to cover. So I learned so much about the craft, so much about software development as a career, as an industry, at just what software developers do, all the things they have to know, different patterns, there was one book, Code Complete, that was like the Bible back then. That was like the software developer's Bible. There's probably other books like it now, but Code Complete was the big one back in the day. And I learned so much about how to write good code, how to name your variables, how to name your functions. With shame, I had to learn this, from this book because I did not know it yet. With shame, I have to recall of how I named my variables when I wrote my Legend of Zelda ripoff, which was it was a graphics mode game, but I couldn't use scrolling. It was very hard to do VGA scrolling back in the day, and I also couldn't use like sound effects or basic like background music. So it was pretty weak in many ways, but I did a lot of things. It was kind of like a role-playing game meets Zelda. And that game, a lot of good memories there. But in the source code for that, I mean, I was putting swear words in the variables. Okay, it was crazy. It was probably my first large code base. I mean, the code base was so large I couldn't compile it in qp.exe. I had to run the compiler from the command line because otherwise it would run out of memory. That's how big this game was not meant to be written in Quick Pascal. I was pushing the limits of what Quick Pascal could handle. So, and I did that. That was kind of a pattern for what I did other times later on in my life, where I tried to push the limits and make kind of a masterpiece. I did that at least 2 other times, which I'll mention here. later on. But I guess, again, bringing this back to the topic here, I did so much to, I set out on a path to become better and better at software development. I learned C, I learned C++, I learned Visual C for Windows to make Windows applications. I did that professionally. I actually wrote a complete voting system. The company I worked for right before, let's say, the end of phase one of my career, which was 1998 to 2000, which was the before the web, before web development era. I wrote a Windows application that was run on a special piece of hardware with a touch screen that was meant for voting. This particular app, this particular program was for the country of Ireland, and they use a different system of voting. They use single transferable vote, STV, which is much harder to compute on the back end when you're tallying the votes. Let's put it that way. You have different rounds. So you have the first round, and then anyone who didn't get like 10% of the votes or 15% of the votes, those votes are looked at, and you go to the second choice the person put down, and it goes to that person. And then you do the second round, and then you see if anyone else gets eliminated. So it's a more intelligent system of voting, I think. It's very interesting. But I had to write the back end, the tallier, and the front end. And I did it all by myself. I designed the app, I wrote it, I troubleshot it, I enhanced it. And then they even flew me to Ireland because they were going to show this thing off, and they wanted me to be able to make changes. I was the only one that could make changes. It was 100% my baby. So I did that. That was my first, that same company, I was first exposed to Linux. Actually, it was Unix. I think I did some Linux on my own then, but the company did Linux because I was actually hired partially to take care of Y2K issues. Yes, I said Y2K, and yes, there were issues. This was for point of sale for hardware stores, for mom and pop hardware stores systems. There was a Y2K bug that I had to fix in COBOL. I had to learn COBOL to do that. So again, I was learning. I think I started learning Java. I was learning all these different languages. And then, of course, after my 3.5 years at the seminary, I got out. I'm like, whoa, things have changed. Now it's all about the web. So I had to learn PHP, MySQL. I learned JavaScript. I did HTML and a little bit of that before because I had a website. I had a pretty popular video game import Japanese kind of website because I knew a lot of Japanese. I'm not a native level speaker, but I was able to translate like posts and things on the news groups, the Usenet news groups. I was translating them and putting them in English and posting them on my website so that people who are hardcore video game nerds could find out what's coming out, what's coming to the States. Because, of course, Nintendo and Sega are both in Japan, and they get the stuff first. And this is before ChatGPT could easily translate stuff for you. So it was interesting. So I had a pretty big website, but it was very low tech. This was in the 90s, a 90s website. So I did a lot of website stuff in the 90s. And I was on the internet from day one. I should also point that out. I've been on the internet since it was dial-up. Okay, so I can remember all that stuff. I've seen where we've been. I'm seeing all the patterns. I have all this experience going back, 30 plus years. So my second phase of my career was web developer. I had to learn the basics, PHP, MySQL or MySQL, and JavaScript. But also that job, it was laid back enough so that I was able to study things in my spare time. Like I wrote a Java GUI app, an actual graphical interface app in Java that allowed them to modify their e-commerce website, database, their products. I actually wrote that in Visual Studio, visualbasic.net. And then when I got into Linux, I'm like, ooh, I don't like this. This is Windows. I won't be able to run this. I rewrote it in Java so that it would be cross-platform because Java apps will run in Mac, Windows, or Linux. So I wrote a GUI application, a point and click, graphical standalone app in both Microsoft.NET, and Java. So I had to learn both those things. And this was a MySQL kind of a front end. So this is not a trivial program, okay? I wrote it twice. And in my spare time, I was doing a lot with JavaScript. I actually wrote in JavaScript. It was basically a browser. I should say HTML and JavaScript with Ajax, posting to the back end without refreshing the page. It was literally a web page, but it looked like Warcraft 2. Do many of you remember Warcraft 2? We're talking a point and click real-time strategy game. You don't normally think of a real-time strategy game as something you run in the browser. But again, nowadays you have Canvas, you have HTML5. This was before HTML5, before Canvas. I wrote essentially a browser game. It did not look like a browser game. In fact, I wrote it for Internet Explorer 6, which let you do crazy things like remap the F5 key. Yes, the F5 key, which normally does refresh, at least in the Linux Windows world. I think on Mac it's different. But the F5 key, I was able to cause it to bring up like a main menu with new game, open game, save game, quit. That was actually something I did. I was exploring what I could get away with in the browser, how much I could make it look like Warcraft 2, how much I could make people forget they were in the browser. This was a freaking web page. It was literally a web page that looked nothing like a web page. It looked everything like a CD-ROM DOS game. And this is something I did for many months as kind of a masterpiece to explore what I could do with JavaScript. Okay, it was real time. It had like a mini map. Everything worked. You had the computer. The computer moved around. He tried to conquer you. You tried to conquer him. You beat the level. You go to the next level. You could save and then load it up on another computer. It transferred the data via Ajax. It was great. So I kept learning. I kept leveling up. Okay, I was constantly practicing my craft, constantly working as a developer and getting better and better, adding more and more to what I could do, to what I was comfortable with, to what I was able to bring to the table to any potential employer. So let's pause here. This is 2006 or 2007, 2008, about the time I wrote that Warcraft 2 clone in the browser. I already thought, I'm a software developer. Yes, I have no 4-year degree, but I already have a lot of experience. I have a pretty good resume. I can already pass myself off as a software developer. I have arrived. I do not have to worry about what am I going to do for a living or what am I going to be when I grow up. Okay. So this was about 20 years ago, we're talking. I had already thought that I've arrived. I've had so many I worked on the side for a couple places. Even with that, I had one main employer. I was kind of a remote employee, actually. I guess it was like an employee relationship, but I think it was probably more like a contract worker because I did have to send in my hours each week, and I was promised 30 hours a week. It was a pretty low rate of pay too, but it lasted from when I moved to Texas in 2004 all the way till they replaced me with nobody in about 2013, 2014, I think was my last paycheck from them. So that I guess you'd almost call that phase 2 of my career. Phase 3 was working as an independent contractor or freelancer. Okay, I was a freelancer again, I was still working for this other company, and I did some freelance, and then especially as the hours tapered off, I did more and more freelance. But again, what is a freelancer? It's someone who can deliver the goods, someone who actually does the work. If you don't do the work, you don't get paid. That's simple. There's no hiding in a cubicle, keeping your head down, hoping no one will notice you, and trying to keep a low profile so the sweet, sweet money can keep rolling in. It's the opposite of a sweet gig, okay? Working as whether it's working as one person for a very small business or being an independent contractor, that is the exact opposite of a corporate job. In corporate jobs, you can get a sweet gig, you can get a sweet job, and sometimes you can spend your day playing games and doing whatever, surfing the web, and getting paid pretty nice. I don't really know what that's like. I did the opposite. I'm always working and doing stuff, okay? So I I didn't really waste any time. I was always having to deliver goods. I was always doing stuff, actually working in PHP, MySQL. I was basically modifying their e-commerce site and adding features. And some of the features were quite complex. Taking a PHP shop kind of site and adding on all kinds of ridiculously advanced features like multi-page stuff from next and a previous and next button, and adding customization to a product and all kinds of weird stuff, and adding lots of different database tables on, modifying their database tables, optimizing them. I learned a lot about MySQL. So again, all this time, even when that job faded away, they actually replaced me with essentially no one. They hired this lady who did like basically art. She had kind of a printing, like a physical printing art background, and she got into a little bit of graphical computer design, like web design, like the graphical side of things. And she couldn't write a line of PHP. I mean, she could, maybe install or work with a PHP website, but don't ask her to write a feature and add it on. She was not a developer. And that's who they replaced me with. So what they replaced me with was a piece of off-the-shelf code. They replaced me with, I believe it was Magento, an off-the-shelf package, because they just didn't want to have an on-staff developer anymore. So at that point, I did a series of, I had a series of clients that I served as a freelancer. And, as I served these clients, I did good work. I never had to say, I'm really not cut out for this. I keep failing. I keep not delivering. They keep being unhappy with me. No, I ran into some challenges. There was one guy that didn't pay, and some of the jobs were smaller, and, there was all kinds of variety. And so as an independent contractor, what do I have to be? I have to be versatile. I have to be flexible, because you don't know what the next guy wants. One guy might want some work on an Android app. The next guy might want a website, or he might want just anything. I just need something that'll crunch these, search for things in a database of driver's licenses or something. I did work for a constable's office in San Antonio. It had to do with looking up a database and searching for where searching addresses and stuff. So I actually wrote them something in PHP MySQL. And in the end, they had me buy a computer, and I got the computer delivered to my house. I set it up for them, set up a LAMP server on it, and delivered it to them. They were happy campers. One more happy camper on my list. And I've done so many other things like that. So again, you have all these different independent kind of gigs. And then, so that's the third phase of my career. The fourth phase is when I started working full time, in an office. That started in 2017. I worked for a company in San Antonio. I had to commute every day. That lasted about a year. And again, I didn't like having to commute because I have a lot going on here. I have a big family and a big piece of property, but we needed to save up some money to add on to our house, or at least to buy an addition for the house. So that's what we did. I bought on an additional building, which I'm sitting in right now. And so it worked out. But the first job I got through it was through a temp agency or an employment agency that focused on technical recruiting. And I worked through them for about a year. And then they didn't have anything else. And I was unemployed for a little bit. I got another job as a web developer, worked there for a couple of years. Then I kind of got into Android development, specifically React Native. I had done a couple of Android games, like using a framework called libgdx. Think like a high performance video game, like for a console. That's what libgdx is capable of. We're talking everything from networking, high speed scrolling, you name it. It has it wasn't a game engine. Don't mix it up with Unreal or with Unity or one of those 3D engines, or even a 2D engine. This isn't like Unity or one of those. This is a library. It's a It's a low-level library that just takes care of some of the lowest level things, but it lets you run the app in on the desktop, Windows, Mac, and Linux, iOS, and Android, and even the browser. So it's kind of a cross-platform library. I thought it was really cool. It still exists. I wrote a couple of games in that. I wrote a Sudoku game, which is very nice, and it's still on the App Store. It's called Squid Sudoku. And then there's another kind of more unique game that wasn't maybe the best game called Mushroom Bounce. It's a 2D physics game. The game mechanics, the game kind of plays itself, okay? It was more of a masterpiece, if you will, to explore what libgdx can do. This was the first game I wrote in libgdx for Android. I explored everything. I ported that game to the Ouya, Ouya, which is a little Android console. I ported it to the Raspberry Pi, and I went in there and I had different flags. I disabled certain things to run differently under the Raspberry Pi. Now remember, Raspberry Pi, that's a different architecture than your typical 32-bit or 64-bit architecture. For the x86 instruction set. We're talking ARM. So I had to cross-compile this game on a Raspberry. This is a Raspberry Pi 1, not a 4 or a 5, on a 1. I think I had to have all the tools on the Raspberry Pi, and I compiled this on the Pi so that I could have a Raspberry Pi version. For a brief time, the Raspberry Pi had like an app store, had like a game. You could sell your game on there. And I think I actually sold like 5 or 6 copies of it on there, and then they shut it down, so I couldn't do it anymore. But that's the level. I put in encryption of my graphical assets so no one could steal them. It's still there to this day on Android. And I did different kinds of controllers support. There was different kinds of controllers. I even had on the desktop version, you could have split screen, like Mario Kart, where you press a button and now you have 2 screens and you can both share the screen and play together. That even worked on the Android. You could have 2 controllers. I mean, it was insane, the level of features I put into this silly game, which wasn't even that well thought out of a game from a design perspective. But I made like 60 levels for the game. I completely finished the game. I had marketing. I had a full version that you bought for a couple dollars. I had an ad-supported version. I had it on all of the app stores, including Amazon.com and all the other main competitors to the Google Play Store. I mean, I had a website. I had a high score, a feature, which was hosted on my website. I mean, you name it, I put it in there. I put in every feature I could think of. It was like scope creep to the nth degree. It was insane. So that was the Android I had done. But then more recently, I got into React Native. I studied React, React.js for the browser, for web. And then I really got interested in React Native. And so I studied it, did some tutorials, and then I started doing it professionally. And that brings us almost up to the present day. I've done that the last few years. But here is where the problem lies. Here's where it gets tricky. Here's why I'm concerned, okay? I've never before been worried that I can keep going forward as a software developer. The competition is so insane. The pickiness is so high. From where I come from, if you're a software developer, you're a software developer. Learning a new library is no big deal. In fact, learning a new language isn't so much of a big deal. Once you understand the concepts, you're in. You're a software developer now. Congratulations, you made it. If you've written things and you have on-the-ground experience and you know how to design and how to troubleshoot and how to code and how to just do the whole process, how to communicate with the client or the interested party, the product owner, as they say. I have talked, shouldn't say I've talked. I have listened to some other experienced developers. There's one guy on YouTube. It's Uncle Steph, as he calls himself. And he says a lot of the same things that I'm saying here, that being a developer is about the whole process, not just about writing code. But he also says it's about the soft skills, communicating, being not painfully, debilitatingly awkward, being able to communicate with people, being able to deal with coworkers and work with and communicate with your coworkers, being able to document your code. I'm good at those things. I hate to say it. I don't want to toot my own horn, but all the things he said you need to do, I'm doing it. I've got it. Okay. I'm really good at teaching and communicating. I believe that's a skill I have. Teaching is not the same skill as doing the thing. Being an expert at math is not the same as being an excellent math teacher. Those are two different things. You could be a genius at writing code or mathematics or any subject, music, playing an instrument, anything, and be a lousy teacher because you don't have the skill of teaching. Teaching is about transferring what's in your brain into your student's brain. You have to keep track of what they know. You have to get feedback from them and kind of figure out where they're coming from. It's about putting yourself in the student's shoes and kind of learning through them. So you're both people at once. You're the teacher, but you're also in their shoes at the same time. So you can kind of get in there and you kind of work that knowledge into their brain, and you're pulling it into their brain from their side as well. It's kind of hard to explain if you haven't done it, but let's just say it's a skill, okay? And it's a skill I have, and it's a skill that's often mentioned that software developers need to get if they want to become unfireable or irreplaceable. If you want to be AI proof, you need to learn these various soft skills. Well, I've got them all. I'm excellent at documentation and troubleshooting and problem solving and communicating. That's my superpower, if anything. And so with that in mind, I've seen a couple other guys on YouTube talking about how they've been unemployed for several months or whatever. There's one guy that I would almost say has gone viral. He was covered by the Primagen. He went over his video, and I think I saw his video before anyone else looked over it. But I think one or two guys have gone over that video, and he was a new software developer that had been in the industry for 3 years, and he considered himself an experienced software developer. Okay, you are more experienced than a newbie. I'll give you that. But I'll see your 3 years and I'll raise you about 28 years. Okay. I should not be looking for a job anywhere and everywhere. I should not even be competing with 20-year-olds, frankly. I should be able to find a job somewhere. And the fact is, I'm having a hard time. I have currently, since my last job, which I lost in July of last year, 2025, I have applied to no less than 2,000 jobs online, mostly on LinkedIn. My last job I got after applying to only 1,200 jobs. The time before that, I think it was more like 100 or 120. So I'm seeing a pattern here. Okay. You might say applying to jobs on LinkedIn, that's the spray and pray. That's low effort. That's low, low tier kind of applications. But it worked before and it's not now. So what does that mean? Does it not mean that something has gone up a level? That something has gone crazy? Something's going up to the next difficulty level. And I just don't understand how someone who lives to code, who is experienced in so many things, because I don't think being a generalist is a bad thing. I think it's a great skill to be able to do lots of different things, to have that perspective and not get sucked into every new framework and every new paradigm and every new fad. But here's the thing. Even if things have gotten so competitive for jobs that companies say, you need to know this library. How many years experience do you have with ember.js? And I'll say none, 0. But does that mean they're just going to dispose of my whole resume? That's not how it would have been 10 years ago. We're talking 10 years ago, not 40 years ago or some crap. No, even 10 years ago. It used to be expected that you had to keep learning. Where are you going to keep learning? You know how many JavaScript and other frameworks there are? Do you have any idea? It is impossible for me to wake up in the morning and just build things and use every framework that exists. And even if I did, they're not going to count it. They didn't say, are you comfortable with it? They said, how many years experience, professional experience do you have with it? Some jobs, they're even so picky, they want you to have experience in their industry. They say, how many years of hospital experience do you have? Like, what difference does that make? I'm a software developer. But they want a software developer who has healthcare experience. It's insane. I mean, I have not done any professional software development for a hospital, but what difference does it make? You go in, you do software development for the hospital. I mean, what level of insanity have we reached where some little JavaScript library, maybe with its own website, like Ember.js or Next.js or whatever, you have to have experience not just in JavaScript, but we want experience in this particular framework or library that uses JavaScript. And if you don't have actual experience in that library, you're not a developer. Get out of here. That's insane. Developers have always, up till now, been accustomed to just learning things on the job. We're not talking, give me 2 weeks and pay me to learn this. No, we're talking like a Google search or a quick visit to the documentation, the getting started guide. Usually it takes like hours or 1 or 2 days to get up to speed. And we're talking a framework. We're not talking a new language or a new way of doing business in programming. We're not talking about object-oriented versus functional paradigm or something. No, we're talking about just getting up to speed on an API or a framework or a library. And they're asking these questions. They say, how many years of this do you have? How many years of this? And we're not talking, when they ask how many years as a back-end developer, okay, that's legitimate. They're looking for experience. Or how many years as a professional software developer? Okay, I'll give you the number. But when they're asking for nitty-picky stuff, like going way too deep, they're saying, what color are your eyes? There's too many unemployed software developers, okay? When they're starting to be that kind of picky, that's insane. And I'm seeing that as a pattern, that there's so much. I don't know if too many people became software developers. There was the people were getting hired with no experience and on a whim and a prayer, kind of like during the housing boom, the last one. Realtors were making deals and selling houses on the trunks of their car, signing the paperwork, just selling cars left and right. The lady at Target, the cashier at Target talked about how she just invested in a house. The market's the bubble's about to burst. When your Starbucks barista is giving you stock advice, the market's about to pop, right? Or when your barista has a couple of investment properties, trying to ride the wave and trying to make money in the housing market, trying to flip houses, it's about to burst when everyone's piled in like that, right? So I think something's got to give, because I believe that there's different levels of software developer. I know you can learn, you can take a tutorial class, a lot of people can maybe take learn kind of the mechanics of it. But let's face it, there are some people who just have an engineer's mindset, an engineer's brain. They built with Legos when they were kids. They wrote games for fun when there was no social or financial incentive to do so. Okay. When I wrote games, it did not get the girls. It did not make me popular. It did not get me clicks. There was no social media or internet to speak of at the time. And there was certainly no financial incentive. I did it because I enjoyed it. So if you're that kind of person, you're a born software developer. There should be room in today's job market for such a born software developer. And that's what I am. And, and another point, you can look at me. I've just said I've have almost 30 years of experience. I've even thrown out some years. So you can calculate about my age. I could just tell you I'm 49. I'm about to hit the big 50 in a year. But here's the thing. I'm not old yet. I am not ceasing to learn new things. My computer was built, last year by myself. I'm using the latest version of Linux Mint, Cinnamon. I'm using VS Code. You know, I'm keeping up with things as much as possible, as much as makes sense to. I'm not jumping on every hype train, but I am still learning things. I Every year of my career, I've always looked, where are things going? What languages do I need to know? What are the top languages? What are the top frameworks? And that's why I got into React Native. It was getting popular. Android apps are still necessary. People are still writing them, but it seems like they often want React Native now, so they can crank it out in an iOS version as well. So I'm keeping abreast of the market and of the industry. And in other news, my health, I'm taking good care of my health. I get 15,000 steps a day. How many of you get that many? I lift a few barbells, lift a little bit of weights. I'm very active. Um, and as far as food, I don't eat junk food. I don't eat any sugar. I'm basically on a keto diet. I go as long as I can between meals, basically, and I eat pretty much healthy food. And I'm trying to lose a few pounds, but you know, my BMI, I'm kind of stocky and muscular, so BMI doesn't work well for me. But my body fat percentage isn't that bad, and I'm pretty healthy. When I go to our family get-togethers, I'm the only adult that's running around with the kids. For Christmas or Thanksgiving. Last Thanksgiving, no, it was last Christmas. We brought I hooked up my utility trailer full of all of my kids' bikes. By the way, I have 9 kids. I brought all my kids' bikes to this get together. It's pretty close by, and I rode my bike too. My wife doesn't ride a bike. She hasn't ridden for years. But all the other adults there, by the way, I am not the youngest adult, but quite the contrary. I'm the oldest in my group. I'm older than my wife. I'm older than all of her brothers and on their spouses. So even though I am by far, I'm not even close to the youngest, I'm the only one that you'll see riding around on scooters, rollerblades, bicycles with the kids, running around with the kids. Or if we're on the, if we go to the park, I'm trying to hang on the monkey bars and stuff, trying to do a pull up, running around, climbing around. So I'm still young, is my point. Okay. I'm not ready to hang up my keyboard yet. So I also want to point out at my last job that had coworkers in person, we would do the daily stand up. I'm walking around the room, curling my dumbbell, right? The other guys, all Gen Z, they're all they're low 20, 22, 25. They're all in their no older than 25. They're eating donuts, cookies. They're all sitting down, and here I am, probably more overweight than them, and here I am eating, healthy food, going for walks, periodic walks away from the computer. I take a break and do some reps on the barbell. So I mean, come on. So I would almost say I deserve to be healthier than them, but that's what happens when you get older. But the point is, when you stay healthy like that, it also tends to keep your mind sharp. Okay. And so my mind is still healthy and sharp. I'm taking care of myself. I'm taking care of my mind. I'm studying things. I don't spend time watching TV. I go outside. I know how to run a tractor. I'm digging a pond and building a huge mountain of dirt that's about 14, 15 feet tall. I do stuff with my kids. I'm very active, and I'm just wondering where does the future lie? What's going to happen? Because I have never seen anything like this, where employers don't want to give a developer any chance to get up to speed, not even a couple of days to get up to speed on the framework they've chosen. And I've only gotten a few interviews. And even of the 2 interviews, I was not chosen. That hurts more. When you do an interview and you go into some of this detail and they still reject you, that hurts. Because they didn't just throw your resume on a pile. They had this big pile of resumes. Maybe the AI filtered it out. No, when they talk to you And they're like, yeah, we don't want that. That hurts more. And you start to question yourself. You're like, hey, what's going on? And like I said, I thought I had arrived like 20 years ago. And now here I am. I should be in the I should be so set for life. I should be a senior dev with a bunch of juniors under me. I should be able to take off whenever, for vacations and stuff. I should be well established. But not only software development, you're always learning. Your experience is always questionably valuable, of questionable value, because things change so much. Every 5 years, throw everything out, bring in a whole new paradigm, a whole new, you go from, we used to have monolithic graphical applications for Windows using, Visual Basic or Visual C and that kind of thing, or Java. And then you had websites and web applications, single page applications. And now and then you have apps. I mean, every 5 or 10 years, it's just whoosh, throw it all out and everything's new. And now we got AI. Now you got AI agents. Now you got to learn how to use all these AI agents to build your code, and how you're doing more reading of code that AI wrote than actually writing it yourself. But AI, I think, is very close to the top of where it's ever going to be. AI can't think. AI will never think. AI won't be able to think a single real thought in 1,000 years, not in a million years, literally not in a million years. It is metaphysically impossible for computer software to be able to think like a human, because it doesn't have an immortal soul. The reason humans can reason is because we can abstract. We can abstract the essence of a thing and understand its essence, which is an immaterial concept. We can have concepts taken up into our brains and think about them. Computers, animals can't do that. They are completely of this world. They are completely physical. Everything of them is of the physical world. What other creature thinks about time, thinks about the future and the past, and worries about what happens after death? That's because half of us, our soul, is immaterial. That's because our soul is going to survive death. So we worry about those things. Animals don't worry about what happens after death because they don't have any concept of the future. They live in the eternal present. We do not. And AI is more like us. One man kind of gave me the idea. He pointed out that it's kind of like the actually, I don't think he applied this to AI, but I'm applying it to AI, and that is the lizard brain. We all have a low level brain. We also call it muscle memory. It's where we learn to do things. We have these associations between a thought or a word or a person and an idea or a feeling. That's how advertising works. We put up the brand name, the logo, and we make the user or the viewer feel good. And then you begin to associate those things together. It's irrational. But what you're doing is you're forming pathways in your neural net, which is your brain, in your lizard brain, the lower part of our brain, because we are half animal. We do have an animal nature, but we also have a soul. Okay. So what is AI able to do? The low end stuff. The AI is able to kind of mimic that neural net that is in our brain. All those things like learning associations, how we learn. We read something 50 times and now we learned it. Well, that's kind of how the AI learns, right? So it's making these associations. Well, what's the problem? Our monkey brains or our lizard brains can't think. Okay, we can't reason with that part of our brain. That's why the AI will never be able to reason with that. The AI can make some interesting associations, make all these pathways, these associations and weights between different words. It's basically like it's an algorithm to complete a sentence. It can generate the English language. It's a large language model. It's basically linear algebra. But what it can't do is think. People think it's thinking. In fact, a lot of the AI companies even use words like reasoning model and thinking ... It'll put on the screen as the AI is crunching and doing its thing. But it's not actually thinking. It is not thinking a single thought. It isn't understanding you. It isn't thinking or anything. That's why the AI models are losing grip on the context of where this function fits into your code, because it can't think. They can't think like a real programmer would think. Real software development and engineering is a thinking task. It takes your reason, it takes your faculty of reason. It is not a muscle memory kind of activity. It takes a lot of reasoning and thinking. So I don't think AI is going to get much better than what we're seeing today. There are multiple walls they're running up against. Someone talked about the math of it. They showed like a graph showing how was it the error level and things are kind of topping out. But there's also computer hardware is not going up exponentially. If anything, we've hit a wall. Moore's law is dead. Okay, computers are not doubling in speed every 18 months anymore. We're getting to where we're built. The process is down to what are the smallest traces being done now on the dies? Are we at 8 nanometer, 10 nanometer, 12 nanometer? You know, it used to be in the hundreds back in the 90s, but you can only get so small, and then you're building with individual atoms, and you're getting quantum effects that you can't control. So that's an issue. And also, they're also noticing that throwing more data at it is hitting a ceiling. And there's only so much data. There's only so much material you can train the AI on. Okay. Once you've fed it the Encyclopedia Britannica, Project Gutenberg, you know, once you've fed it all these things, all of Stack Overflow, all of Facebook, you know, once you've fed it all these things, what else is there? There's only so much material we can feed these AIs. So there's no room for a 4x to make it 4 times better, because there's not 4 times the material to feed it. And we can't make, you know, we're running, I mean, let's face it, right now we're in a RAM shortage that's going to last at least all the way through 2026. And that's just the beginning. I mean, and people don't want these AI farms in their backyard. Not in my backyard. Is starting up now. So something's got to give. These AI companies, they're probably operating at a loss. You know, there's one guy, there's probably several guys, but let's just take the one. He's running he creates AI slop music videos. And he talked about how he does it. And he basically goes with the $200 tier to get unlimited whatever. And if he couldn't get unlimited on the AI models, he would not be able to generate his AI slop videos. In other words, $200 a month, that wouldn't do it. If it was any kind of a solid locked in amount, he has to take advantage of that loss leader, you know, being one of those top people who abuses it, you know, because a lot of people who buy the top tier aren't going to maximize it that much, but there's always a few who do when you do the unlimited plan of anything. So he's one of those few. He's kind of almost like arbitrage. He's getting in there and taking advantage of this to crank out these AI slot videos. But you know what? I don't think he's making a mint with the videos. I think, first of all, people are getting sick of AI slop. And of the videos he made a few that I think were very good, but most of them are a miss. I don't think he even knows how to hit it, what was good about the ones that were good. It's like he just keeps trying. But again, I'm seeing a pattern here. I'm seeing where this is going. I've noticed that Cursor and a lot of the other ones, they're focusing now on credits. You get so many dollars of credits. So pretty much when you make that query, when you do that thing in your Cursor or in your AI-enabled IDE, it's almost like you have to slip $1 in a slot, like in a pop machine, or slip some quarters in a slot every time you run the AI. What fun is that? I mean, could you imagine every time you do a Google search having to put in a dime or a nickel? You'd stop doing Google searches real fast. You'd be like, I'm wasting all my money here. And that's kind of what it's coming down to, is the party's going to end. You know, all these AI companies, they're promising the future. They're promising AGI just around the corner. But what happens when it doesn't happen? And I'm here to tell you it's not going to happen. From what I understand, and I'm pretty convinced. I mean, if I could bet money, if I could put, you know, like if I could take I would sell things and take money and put it on the market. If I could bet that there will not be AGI in 100 years, or to bet that AI will never be able to think. I mean, I wish I could put my money where my mouth is, because I would. I am that convinced. It is metaphysically impossible Just like it's impossible for 2 and 2 to be 3, 4 and 5 at the same time, in the same way, an AI will never be able to think. But I know how it's used. And back to what I was saying about not being old, I'm not one of these, we're all going to die, AI is going to kill us all, the Terminator robots are coming, because that's stupid. But I'm also not one of those who says, oh, AI is fake, it's all just, it's all smoke and mirrors, it's all trickery. No, there are real tools. It's useful for certain things today. But here's the catch. The things it's good at today, that's all it's ever going to be able to do. Don't worry about what it's going to do. That's probably never going to happen, is what I'm telling you. The things they're claiming it's going to be able to do, don't get your hopes up. Don't put any money on it, because it's not happening. They cannot make AI much better than the best models today. That's all I'm going to say. What I think the future of AI is private models, open source, locally run, open weight, that is to say uncensored models. That's where my interest is. I'm very interested in running them locally, because I don't like all this putting their opinions in. When I ask a question, I want an impartial opinion, and I don't want it to guardrail me, or, you know, let's put it this way: Pliny the Liberator, he's my hero. That's the guy that likes to jailbreak the models within hours of when they come out. He's got my approval. He's a good guy. I like what he does. He's doing God's work, jailbreaking those models, because I can't stand that kind of censorship. And I think the future of AI is, what can we do on local hardware? Because that way you're not having to pay for every little search. You have control over what it does. You have control of your privacy and your data. I think that's going to be the future of AI. But be that as it may, I'm very aware of AI, the current tools, the tool set, you know, Cursor, and then different ones that are coming out now. There's new ones coming out every day. You got Open Code, and you got lots of competitors. There's Windsurf and other ones. But again, how could I and why would I become experienced with all of those? I'm a developer. I've been a hardcore developer since AI came out, right? I'm doing nothing else. I'm doing it all day long, let's say. I have Cursor. Maybe I have Open Code. Why would I have any experience with Windsurf or some of the other ones? Why would I spend money on 5 or 6 or 10 different products just so that when that company says, how many years of Windsurf do you have? No, I picked one, and that's the one I'm using. I know about AI. I know about RAG. That's retrieval augmented generation. I've written a RAG utility in Python. I have the working example of essentially a chat GPT that's fortified with a bunch of PDFs that I provided. And so I could have kind of my own custom chat GPT. And here's the thing, it runs locally. I have it running on 2 different PCs. It queries them and figures out who's the freest. There's 3 video cards across 2 PCs. It queries those 3 different instances of Ollama, checks who's the least busy, hits one of them up. And what it does is it hits the RAG server first, and it does a RAG lookup, and then it hits one of those Ollama instances with my LLM of choice, which I still haven't picked for sure yet. I'm experimenting with different ones. It hits that one and gets the response, and it goes back to the user. I'm using Open Web UI as my front end, and it's mostly working. I'm still working on it and putting some finishing touches, and mostly I ran into problems with too small of context size. I was using, I'm going to get this mixed up, Llama 3 Dolphin, and then there's Dolphin 3. One of them had like an 8K context size, so it was just too small. I'm cramming a bunch of context in with my RAG lookup, and I want the answers to be longer. So I need a larger context. So that one wasn't going to work. That one was open weight, though. It was completely free. But then I tried GPT OSS, way too locked down. It was a great model, but it was way too locked down. And then I was trying Dolphin 3, and I'm playing with that one now. But I'm running into problems with preconceived notions. Issues of being opinionated about different topics, and I don't like that. I want it to be more, if I feed it a bunch of data, I want it to use that data only. So anyhow, the point is, from A to Z, whether it's languages, platforms, frameworks, or even things like AI, I have kept up to date. I am a software developer through and through, even if I am in my late 40s, 49 to be exact, but I'm an experienced developer. I should be useful to some company somewhere. I live 45 minutes, or actually from the eastern side of San Antonio, I'm only about 25 minutes. But usually, if you go to downtown, it's more like 40 minutes, 45 minutes. I'm 35 minutes from the San Antonio International Airport. So I have 5 acres. I live near Seguin, Texas, but I am not in the boonies. I'm right off the highway. There's a main interstate, like less than a mile from my house. I can see the interstate. We're on kind of a hill. I can see the interstate from my house. Okay, and I used to make the commute every day, every work day. And San Antonio, Texas, is the 7th largest city in the United States by population. So it's not a small town, okay? There should be some work there that needs doing. And I have not just been applying to remote jobs. I've been applying to local ones as well. I am willing to commute, but I'm not even getting callbacks from the San Antonio ones. Like I said, freaks me out a little bit. I'm a little concerned. So what's going on? What's the future of software development? And then a postscript. Hopefully this is not a tendency. Hopefully this is just isolated instances. But I'm collecting, let's say, a wall of shame as I look for jobs on places like LinkedIn. I have seen regular, not junior, but just regular software development positions seeking 2 to 5 years experience, sometimes 5+ years experience, paying $40,000 a year. Could you imagine doing a skilled job like software development with this whole litany of skills? You got to have experience at this, and this, and lots of experience. And we'll pay you $40K a year. We'll pay you $20 an hour to be a software developer. That is beyond insane. I hope that is not where my industry is going, because I enjoy software development. It's what I'm good at. There's really not anything else. I've given, in my darkest moments, I have given some thought. What else can I do? What happens if I can't find a job? What other career could I do? I'm not 20 anymore. I mean, some of these jobs require training, and you can't just they might not take you in if you're that old, but it's insane. I can do computer stuff. I can not even just, I could do hardware. I could do software. I even dabble in electronics. Since 2019, I got hot and heavy into low-level electronics. I'm a ham, not just, I'm an amateur extra level ham. That's the 3rd level of being a ham. That's the one that gets into a lot of the EE or electronics engineering kind of stuff. If you look behind me, you can see there's I have several pieces of equipment there. Those are the power supplies. I got an oscilloscope up there. I have a spectrum analyzer, one of the nice ones. You can't see it from here. And all my radio equipment is also off screen. But I have so much stuff here. I could build so many circuits right now. I could do Arduino stuff, low level stuff. But again, they wouldn't hire me without experience. I'd love to do Arduino in C and do low level bit banging and real low level stuff. But I can't point to anything on my resume where I've done it professionally. So they're not going to let me do it. Not now. If this were the 90s, they probably would, but not anymore. So, you talk about breadth. You got hardware, low-level computers, low-level programming, all the different levels of programming, so much experience. I've written so many programs, troubleshot so many things. Is there anyone out there looking for a good software developer? I would like to stay in this career. I'm not looking to become, I'm not looking to get into food service or some service industry. There's lots of things I can do. Don't get me wrong. I can drive a tractor. I know how to give haircuts. I know how to cook. I know how to bake. I know how to do like 50 things. I'm a Renaissance man, basically. I'm into learning as many things as I can. Even in my software developer career, as you can tell from this video, I'm into being well-rounded. I'm into being a polymath or a Renaissance man. I like to learn everything. I like to, be a generalist. That's my thing. And even in life in general, I've gone that direction. There's not a single thing that I want to be stupid about, whether it's fixing a car, changing oil, um, sewing, crocheting. I can do basic crochet. I can do some basic sewing. I know how to use a sewing machine. I know how to fire a gun. I know some basics about marksmanship. I know about so many topics. Gardening. I've grown lots of things. How to plant a tree, orchard. I mean, I don't want to list all the things I can do, or this is going to go on for another hour. But just for software development, paying me as a software developer, I have a lot to bring to the table. And I have not seen any other software developers my age saying these things. I've seen Stefan Mischuk, Uncle Steph. He strikes me as a bit naive about it. He would tell me, he tells people, here's how you get into the industry. Learn the right language, JavaScript, PHP, based on what you want to do. Write some real things that show you know how to write a full app. Or he also says, work for some real people for free if necessary, to show that you can communicate and develop and see it through to the end. Well, I've done that 50 times, and I got all the soft skills he talks about. And I've seen people who work for 3 years. I can't really say I've seen any other 30-year developers. This would be like Stefan Mischuk getting on there saying, I can't find work, I'm unemployed, what's up? He hasn't said that. And he apparently had a better career than me. Maybe I spent too much time with my family or working as a freelancer, because like I said, I only started getting into like driving into work at a company in 2017. So that's on me. Okay. I spent 10 years at that remote company. I was basically like a remote employee. And so maybe that stunted my career a bit, maybe. But again, I succeeded in lots of freelance work for several years. And those other jobs, the other thing is these recent jobs I've had, I did not do bad at them. I flourished. I prospered. I did great. They even loved my work. A couple jobs ago, I wrote a whole React Native app. They loved my work. The owner loved it. He said he was going to call and thank me. Well, a few months later, he laid me off instead because they lost their main client. So they literally had to cut jobs, and I was the senior dev. They got rid of me. Very bizarre. I was not expecting that. And the last job too, I was doing great work, never got any criticism. In fact, that job, I would almost say it was the first time I got really concerned because my boss basically kind of fell for the grass is greener on the other side. He wanted to hire another developer like 4 months, about 4 months after I got hired. And so many more developers hit up his inbox. He had like 300, 350 responses. This is only months after he hired me. And it blew him away. So much so that he's like, you know what? For the good of this project, I got to try one of these other guys. I think I could find someone better now. There's so many more. Statistically, I'm going to find someone better. And that's pretty much where he left it. He didn't point to a single thing I was doing poorly or slowly or never mind wrong. I was doing great. I mean, I jumped into AI with both feet. I knew about all the models, and I was writing sample code and doing and integrating stuff and setting up systems. And so, yeah, what I'm seeing is this last job, how the flood of people onto the market is causing people to instantly get super picky, to instantly think that they can do better. And I'm a bit worried. How long is this going to last? Because, I can't be unemployed forever. So if any of you know someone who's looking for a good experienced software developer, put it in the comments below. And if you know anyone else in my situation, any other videos who are experienced and can't find work, we're talking like 2 decades plus, I'd like to know about it. I'd like to hear their story, because I haven't seen a lot of these others on YouTube. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have recorded and shared my story today. But there you have it. I look forward to hearing your comments below. I'll talk to you later. I'll keep you up to speed. Maybe I'll record a follow-up report, another video in a month or 2 or 10 when something changes. But for now, I'm going to leave it at that. That's my story. That's where I'm at. Talk to you guys later. Have a good one. Goodbye.